On the morning he was supposed to walk into a federal prison and begin serving 20 years, a Wall Street millionaire simply vanished. His car was found abandoned on a bridge above a river, engine cold, keys still in the ignition. And scratched into the dust on the hood was one chilling message, meant to make investigators believe he had jumped. They searched the water for days. They found nothing. And there's a reason for that. The body they were looking for was never in the river. It was driving away in a rented motorhome under a fake name, headed for a campground 3 states away. This is the story of a man who convinced the world he was dead. He wasn't. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why federal agents called it one of the most audacious disappearing acts in American financial history. His name was Samuel Israel III, and he was never supposed to struggle for anything. Born in 1959 into a wealthy family of commodities traders in New Orleans, his own grandfather had built a trading firm that later sold for over $40 million. Israel went to an elite boarding school in New York, then on to Tulane University, though he never actually finished his degree. Somewhere out there, a college admissions officer is still waiting on his final paper. He didn't need to finish. By his 20s, he was already trading on Wall Street, riding the wave of a family name that opened doors most people spend a lifetime trying to find. But here's the thing about being handed a golden ticket. Eventually, you're expected to prove you deserved it. And in 1996, Israel decided he would prove it by building an empire of his own. He called it the Bayou Hedge Fund Group, and the pitch was simple, almost too simple. Consistent returns year after year, no matter what the market was doing. While other funds crashed during downturns, Israel told investors Bayou would just keep climbing, roughly 14% a year, like clockwork. Money poured in. Friends invested. Family invested. Seasoned professionals who should have known better invested. For a while, on paper, it looked like Israel had actually cracked the code that every hedge fund manager on the planet was chasing. But paper lies. And Bayou's paper was lying from almost the very first year. Here's the part that should make your stomach turn. Court records later showed that Bayou never posted a single profitable year, not one, in its entire decade of existence. By 1998, just 2 years in, the fund was already underwater. So instead of telling investors the truth, Israel and his chief financial officer, a man named Daniel Marino, did something almost cartoonishly bold. They created their own fake accounting firm, whose only job was to audit Bayou and rubber stamp it as healthy. It's basically grading your own homework, then mailing the report card to your parents yourself. Every week, every month, every quarter, glowing reports went out to investors describing profits that simply did not exist. Think about that for a second. He didn't just lie to his investors. He built an entire shell company whose sole purpose was to lie to them more convincingly, on a recurring schedule like clockwork, for the better part of a decade. And it worked. Money kept flowing into Bayou's offices in Stamford, Connecticut, right up until the moment it all came crashing down. But that's nothing compared to what happened next, because Israel's plan to dig himself out of the hole didn't just fail. It practically walked straight out of a spy movie. Desperate to cover his tracks and actually generate real money, Israel fell in with a man named Robert Booth Nichols, who claimed, with total confidence, to be a CIA asset connected to covert operations most people will never hear about. Nichols told Israel about something he called the shadow market, a secretive, invitation-only world of trading tied to old, mysterious Federal Reserve bonds, supposedly linked all the way back to funding Chiang Kai-shek's resistance against Japan during World War II. It sounds absurd saying it out loud. It was absurd. But Israel, drowning and desperate, handed this self-proclaimed spy $10 million of investor money, chasing a payday that never existed anywhere except in Nichols's imagination. According to later reporting, Nichols himself genuinely seemed to believe his own story, insisting he just needed a skilled trader like Israel to help unlock access to this so-called shadow market. There was just one problem nobody wanted to admit. Israel's trading skills, the entire foundation of his reputation on Wall Street, had been wildly exaggerated from the start. So you had one man lying about being a spy and another man lying about being a financial genius, each one convinced the other held the missing piece. Somewhere, a real CIA officer is reading this story and shaking their head. A con man conning a con man, using the language of secret government conspiracies to keep the whole thing spinning. You genuinely cannot make this up, and the wildest part is nobody had to. But as ridiculous as this sounds, it's nothing compared to the excuse Israel would come up with a few years later, when he needed to disappear completely. By 2004, the walls were closing in fast. Over 6 days that summer, Israel and Marino pulled roughly $161 million out of Bayou's bank accounts and wired about $100 million of it overseas, trying to make the losses disappear before anyone noticed. But someone did notice. In the summer of 2005, a skeptical investor started asking pointed questions about Bayou's mysterious auditor. Within weeks, the fund collapsed entirely. When that investor showed up to collect a redemption check, he found an empty office and a note left behind by Marino, quietly admitting the whole thing had been a fraud from the start. The United States Securities and Exchange Commission moved fast, filing a civil case that September accusing Israel and Marino of defrauding investors and misappropriating their money for personal use, and asking the court to freeze whatever assets were left. Israel and Marino disappeared for a short time, then surrendered, and eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy and fraud. In April of 2008, a judge handed down the sentence, 20 years in federal prison, and an order to pay back $300 million, out of a total fraud investigators say topped $450 million, money that had come from friends, family, and professional investors who trusted a track record that had never actually existed. To put that in perspective, at the height of his wealth, Samuel Israel was rich enough to rent a house directly from Donald Trump for $32,000 a month, which might be the only time in this story someone paid market rate for anything. 20 years behind bars must have felt like a different planet. And Israel, by his own admission in court, considered ending his life rather than face it. That sentiment didn't last. What he chose instead was so strange, so theatrical that it would make headlines around the world, and honestly, it's the part of this story you came here for, so let's get into it. June 9, 2008. The day Samuel Israel was ordered to report to prison. He never showed up. Instead, state troopers found his SUV abandoned on the Bear Mountain Bridge, high above the Hudson River, just north of New York City. The engine was off. The keys were inside. And written into the dust and pollen on the hood in plain block letters were 3 words: "Suicide is painless," the title of the theme song from the movie and TV show Emma Sh. For a moment, investigators genuinely believed they were looking at a bridge jumper. They combed the river for a body for days. They found absolutely nothing, and the more they looked, the less it added up. No witnesses saw a jump. No body ever surfaced. And within about 10 days, the truth cracked wide open because Israel's girlfriend, a woman named Deborah Ryan, was brought in for questioning, and she finally told investigators what actually happened that night. According to Ryan, Israel woke her up in the middle of the night and begged her to help him disappear. She agreed. Together, they loaded a rented motorhome with his clothes and a motor scooter and parked it near the bridge the night before his disappearance. In the morning, Israel drove his own SUV out onto the bridge, scratched his fake suicide message into the dust, abandoned the car, and climbed into the waiting RV to vanish into the American countryside. He reportedly traveled under at least one fake name during his time on the run. Federal investigators put his face on America's Most Wanted. They released photos of the recreational vehicle and its license plate to the public, warning that Israel might be spotted at highway rest stops or quiet campgrounds anywhere along the East Coast. For nearly a month, one of Wall Street's most notorious fraudsters lived like a ghost, hiding in plain sight in a rented RV with a scooter strapped to the back, which has to be the least glamorous fugitive lifestyle in financial crime history, moving from campground to campground while federal marshals combed the region for him. Investigators eventually traced him to a wooded campground in the small town of Granville, Massachusetts, close to the Connecticut border. But by the time they zeroed in on the location, they didn't even need to make an arrest, because a fugitive on the run for a month had already made his own decision. But even a man desperate enough to fake his own death eventually runs out of road. On July 2, 2008, Samuel Israel drove up to a small-town police station in Southwick, Massachusetts, on his motor scooter. He was on the phone with his own mother at the time, who had spent days quietly urging him to turn himself in. A grown man worth hundreds of millions on paper, ending a month on the run because his mom told him to. When he was brought back before the same federal judge who had sentenced him months earlier, she looked at him and said only this: "Welcome back, Mr. Israel." His $500,000 bail was forfeited on the spot. Israel later told the court he had actually tried to take his own life for real while he was a fugitive, and that when it didn't work, he decided it wasn't meant to be and turned himself in instead. Whether that's true or just another chapter in a very long pattern of self-mythology is something only Samuel Israel really knows. And that wasn't even close to the end of his consequences. The consequences kept stacking up. In 2009, Israel was sentenced to an additional 2 years on top of his original 20, bringing his total sentence to 22 years, all for the crime of failing to report to prison in the first place. Deborah Ryan, the girlfriend who helped him disappear, pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting his escape and was ultimately sentenced to 3 years of probation, after also getting caught trying to smuggle $300 in cash to Israel in jail, hidden inside the pages of a magazine, which is a twist straight out of a prison movie, except this one actually got her arrested. And Robert Booth Nichols, the self-proclaimed spy who convinced a hedge fund manager that secret wartime bonds could save his empire, died just 1 year after Israel's arrest, taking whatever the real truth was about his own story with him. Here's how big this story actually got. NBC News aired a full Dateline special about the disappearance that September, calling it, quite literally, the mystery of the missing millionaire. Years later, CNBC's American Greed devoted an entire episode to the case, naming it after the very words scratched into the dust on that bridge. A federal fugitive investigation, a nationwide manhunt, a girlfriend under arrest, and a fake suicide message referencing a decades-old TV theme song, all wrapped around a financial fraud that had already stolen hundreds of millions of dollars. It's the kind of story that sounds made up because it's genuinely stranger than fiction. And yet every piece of it is sitting in federal court filings, SEC press releases, and network news archives to this day. But here's the question everyone still asks. After faking his death, running for a month, and getting caught on a scooter, what actually happened to Samuel Israel? Stick around because the answer is almost as strange as everything that came before it. So where's Samuel Israel now? He's still behind bars at a federal prison in Butner, North Carolina, and public records list his earliest possible release date as September of 2027, nearly 2 decades after his fraud first collapsed. In 2019, he applied for early release, citing serious health problems, including a failing pacemaker that authorities were slow to service and a degenerative spine condition. That request was denied. The man who once faked his own death to avoid 20 years now sits, very much alive, quietly serving out almost the exact sentence he tried so hard to escape. Think about that for a second. A man convinced hundreds of investors, his own friends and family included, that he had built an unbeatable investment machine, when in reality, it never made a single dollar of real profit. When that lie ran out of road, he tried to fix it by trusting an even bigger liar, a man who sold him a secret history that never existed. And when both of those lies finally collapsed on top of him, his last move wasn't to run toward freedom. It was to fake his own death and hope the entire world would simply stop looking. For about 10 days, it almost worked. Samuel Israel convinced the FBI, the media, and half the country that he was gone for good. He wasn't. And maybe that's the real lesson buried inside this entire story. You can fake a fortune. You can fake an audit. You can even fake a suicide note scratched into the dust on a car. But sooner or later, in one way or another, the truth always finds its way back to the surface.